Are you looking for some good books to read this summer? Pamela, Julie, and Allison have some great suggestions for you. First up, some nonfiction.
Starting with nonfiction and The Wager by David Grann. You may recognize the author for his book, Killers of the Flower Moon. The movie is now being released, directed by Martin Scorsese, featuring Leo DiCaprio, Robert De Niro, and Lily Gladstone. This one is another thriller of narrative nonfiction. As you might guess from the cover, it's the story of a ship, but it's also a lot more. During the war between England and Spain in 1740, the British ship The Wager set out to capture a Spanish prize, but was shipwrecked off South America. The survivors either aligned with the captain or the ship's gunner. Several eventually returned to England, where they were court-martialed and tried for treason. But this is more than simply a story of survival and possible mutiny. Gran weaves in the place of seafaring and shipwreck in our cultural stories. In presenting this tale, he offers us the truth behind this story of racism, empire, bureaucracy, greed. I really enjoyed this book, and many reviewers, as well as I, think it's just nearly perfect. The Wager by David Grann.
A Fever in the Heartland and the Ku Klux Klan's plot to take over America and the Woman Who Stopped Them was released April 4th and written by Pulitzer and National Book Award winner Timothy Egan. This historical thriller tells the story of how the Klan came to power in the 1920s in America, beginning in Indiana, and then the subsequent growth of the movement that targeted Blacks, Jews, Catholics, and immigrants. It's also the story of how the founder, D.C. Stevenson, was finally brought down. When Madge Oberholzer met D.C. Stevenson at a party, her goal was simple. She wanted to encourage him to persuade the Indiana legislature to keep her literacy program. Their relationship quickly turned romantic and then violent, and Oberholzer played a pivotal role in exposing the truth behind Stevenson and the Klan. I must give a trigger warning on this book. It contains hate speech, racial violence, sexual assault, and violence against women. I question the violence as it's so horrific, but you'll soon discover it's an integral part of this ugly time in our American history. I read one reviewer who said they had to take frequent breaks to clear their head. And they said, quote, "As much as I struggled with the content of A Fever in the Heartland, I think it's a well-written book about an important historical event. It reminds us that grand dragons can be defeated if we can summon the courage to fight back against evil." End quote.
A Living Remedy, a memoir by Nicole Chung. You may be familiar with her previous book, All You Can Ever Know, the author's search for her place as a Korean adoptee while she sought the truth of her birth story. This memoir is her beautifully written and timeless account of her love for her adoptive parents as they grappled with, quote, just getting by, end quote, while living paycheck to paycheck and suffering from poor health, while she was seeking her own way in the world and finding the path that she would take. Chung left Oregon for college on the East Coast, and like most young people, focused on herself and her future. Back home, her parents were struggling. Her father died quite suddenly. This book grapples with guilt after loss, moving forward and finding her way. She says, quote, grief is like waking up every day in a different house, end quote. While her personal story, it is also a profound and universal story of love, grief, and family.
The Many Lives of Mama Love, a memoir of lying, stealing, writing, and healing, will be released July 6th from author Laura Love Harden. the co-author of the best-selling Oprah selection, The Sun Does Shine. When police knock on the million-dollar home of a perfect cul-de-sac, people are stunned to hear of the arrest of Laura Love Hardin. This soccer mom was hiding a really huge secret. She was paying for her heroin addiction by stealing credit cards from the neighbors and people around her. Laura is then convicted of 32 felonies and begins to navigate the jail class system just like she would those PTA meetings in her suburban neighborhood. Soon, she finds herself the shot caller of the jail day room. Upon her release, Hardin becomes a ghostwriter and finds herself telling other people's stories. She's meeting with Oprah, the Dalai Lama, and Archbishop Desmond Tutu. But all the while, the guilt and the shame from Laura's past haunt her. She says shame is a poison worse than heroin. There is no way to detox. Hardin must learn how to forgive herself and others, navigate life as a felon on probation, and prove to herself that she is more good than bad, so much more. The Many Lives of Mama Love is a heartbreaking and tender journey from shame to redemption. David Sheff, author of the #1 New York Times bestseller Beautiful Boy, says this book can help anyone who has struggled and felt hopelessness. And who hasn't? This book shows that not only can we survive the bleakest of times, we can thrive in them and because of them.
Now we'll look at some great historical fiction.
The White Lady by Jacqueline WINSPEAR. The author of the very popular Maisie Dobbs series has created a new heroine. This book follows former wartime operative Eleanor White, the veteran of 2 wars, a trained killer, and now protective of her anonymity, as she is drawn back into a world of violence. It's 1947, post-World War II Britain, and 41-year-old Miss White, as Eleanor is known, lives quietly in a village in Kent, England. And then the Mackey crime family demands the services of her neighbor Jim, a young farm worker who thought he had left the life of his family behind. Eleanor assumes the task of protecting Jim Mackey, his wife Rose, and their young daughter Susie. We learn just how dangerous her former life was, and Eleanor's actions show she hasn't forgotten much about how to survive. The truth about what happened to her in 1944 and the terrible event that led to her wartime suicide attempt are also gradually revealed. It's a very exciting book, and I hope we'll be seeing more of Eleanor White.
Hula by Jasmine Eliana Hicks is historical fiction to contemporary fiction set in Hawaii. It's the story of 3 generations of women, and there's a lot of rifts and issues within the family, but the youngest member of the family is trying to heal some of those rifts by competing in and hopefully winning the Miss Aloha Hula competition, something her family has been involved with for many generations. But more family secrets emerge as we learn the backstory of all these women and the rifts deepen. This book connects Hawaii's history and story through the story of these 3 amazing women as they grapple with their identity and connection to family. As mixed race people, they often feel they're not Hawaiian enough when they're in Hawaii and not white enough when they move to the mainland. Please read Hula and get to know these women.
Good Night, Irene by Luis Alberto Urrea. Urrea's last book was the entertaining House of Broken Angels, about a large Mexican-American family's simultaneous birthday and funeral celebrations in San Diego. This novel was published recently and was prompted by his white mother's Red Cross service during World War II, when an elite group of women drove military buses at the front line to provide friendship and snacks, including freshly made donuts for the troops. Irene Woodward, fleeing her abusive fiancé, and Dorothy Dunford, seeking adventure far from her quiet Midwestern town, were 2 of the donut dollies, and they became fast friends. They were ordered to be big sister girl next door, mom, or sweetheart to each of the brave boys. You are nothing less than home for them, they were told. In this story, we become immersed in the lives of men and women facing the terrible hardships of the war, but also growing up together. Urea is a wonderful storyteller who creates fully realized characters who form lifelong friendships with each other and with the reader. And the ending, wow, I loved it. This is my first 5-star novel of the year.
Lady Tan's Circle of Women is by Lisa C. It is historical fiction set in China in the 15th century. You know Lisa C. from books like Sunflower and The Secret Fan and The Tea Girl of Hummingbird Lane. This is a fictionalized account of Tan Junjing, a woman who became a physician for female patients. At that time, doctors in China were not allowed to see or touch their female patients. They sat behind a screen and just listened to them talk. Needless to say, this led to some misdiagnoses. She prevails despite her family being opposed to her pursuing more education, and eventually publishes a book of her cases. It's a wonderful look back at history, but with themes that resonate today: the rules governing women's bodies, women's role in society, and China is grappling with a smallpox epidemic and has developed something called variolation, which is very much like our modern vaccines. I think you'll love yet another wonderful historical fiction from Lisa C. And now for some romance or romantic comedies. Curtis Settenfield's new book is romantic comedy. We're calling it literary fiction/romance because it is in our general fiction area. But what is the difference between a romance, a rom-com, literary fiction? Very often it's who wrote it. And Sittenfeld is known as being a literary author of books such as Sisterland or Rodham. In this book, Sally is a sketch writer and performer on a television show that very much is a takeoff on Saturday Night Live. She's been working there successfully for several years, and she has a theory that the homely guys on the show, whether they're writers or performers, often end up dating the really beautiful women who appear as guest artists on the show, but that the men who appear as guests on the show are never going to go for the women writers. So along comes a gorgeous, popular rock star who will be appearing on the show, and Sally writes a sketch about her dating theory. But sparks do fly, and there's a little bit of romantic tension in the air. But then COVID comes along and disrupts that. It was an amazing look at what it must be like to produce a show like Saturday Night Live in 1 week. She obviously did a lot of research because there's so much detail about how quickly things are written, rewritten, practiced, rehearsed, and then changed even as the show is going on the air. It was really interesting to read this in light of the current writers' strike and realize how much the writers mean to that show.
Hello, Stranger will be published July 11th from Catherine Center, author of books you may remember like The Bodyguard and What You Wish For. Sadie Montgomery is a struggling artist who paints portraits. She gets her biggest boost after she wins the North American Portrait Society competition. And it's on her way home in preparation to celebrate when she collapses and winds up in the hospital. At first, it's thought that she'll undergo routine surgery. However, things quickly take a turn and become much more serious. Sadie awakens and learns her diagnosis of prosopagnosia, or face blindness. She can see, but every face that she looks at is now jumbled with disconnected features. Sadie must develop coping skills to determine an individual's identity. All this while she's dealing with family drama and problems. But suddenly, she finds herself falling in love with not one man, but two. And one of my favorite parts of this romance is the reminder that there are always other ways of seeing. This unique love story is receiving some early and rave reviews from Catherine Center fans, but also people who embrace a really great story, strong character, and discovering love in the most unique way. One reader review said, "This is, quote, the kind of book that's unforgettable. It contains a tangible magic you can't explain. You just have to experience. Hello, Stranger is that type of book. It's simply storytelling magic," end quote.
The Lonely Hearts Book Club by Lucy Gilmore. This book about books centers around the personal book collection of old curmudgeon Arthur McLachlan. When librarian Sloane Parker realizes she hasn't seen Arthur at the library for a while, she knocks on his door and finds that he's become bedridden. By the way, this is only in a book. Tracking down missing patrons at home isn't really part of our job. Anyway, Sloane starts visiting him regularly under the guise of organizing his many books. Soon, another lonely neighbor is bringing food. Arthur's estranged grandson shows up, and they all begin a sort of book club. I really liked all the characters and appreciated another story about the role books can play in our lives. It was warm-hearted and intelligent.
There are so many books that feature books coming out in the next couple of months or were just published, so we wanted to share a few of those with you. No Two Persons by Erica Bauermeister. The title refers to the notion that no two people experience a book the same way. This reads like connected short stories about different people's experience with the same book. First we meet the author, then someone from the publishing industry, and then various readers. Wonderful characters. This would be a great book club pick, and I highly recommend the audiobook because it's a full cast narration, so each person's voice really comes through strongly. Next, we have The Wishing Game by Meg Schaffer. This is sort of a game-based book in which what happens when a children's author, wildly popular author, just stops writing and vanishes to live on his private island. Many years later, he announces that he has written one more book, and he has invited 4 of his biggest fans, who are now adults, to his island to compete in the wishing game to try to win that one copy of his newest book. The Book That Wouldn't Burn by Mark Lawrence is a fantasy pick. I mean, I picked it up because of that cover. So if you love fantasy, this is probably for you. This is a library that goes on for miles, and some people are stuck inside. 4 people have never left that library and want to know what's going on in the outside world. And the people outside the library want the knowledge that's inside the library. And last, we have the Air Raid Book Club by Annie Lyons, author of The Brilliant Life of Eudora Honeysett, and it has the same uplifting feeling. Yes, it is set in World War II, but it's really about making connection through books. Gertie's bookstore doesn't fulfill her the way it used to when her husband was alive. But in 1939, she finds a new purpose in taking in a 15-year-old girl who fled Germany. It's a heartwarming story of found family, love, and connections through books. Now we're going to change things up a bit.
Fourth Wing by Colorado author Rebecca Yarros was released May 2nd and instantly became a New York Times bestseller. This romance fantasy is the first in a duology. Book 2 is due out in November. 20-year-old Violet has joined the hundreds of candidates who are striving to become the elite, a dragon rider. But when you're small and your body is brittle, death might only be a heartbeat away, because dragons will take out and incinerate people like Violet. There are fewer dragons than cadets, and so most would kill Violet to better their chances of success. Others might just kill her for who she is, her mother's daughter, like Xaden, the powerful and most ruthless wing leader. She will need every edge her wits can give her just to see the next sunrise. The war outside grows more deadly, the kingdom wards are falling, and the death toll is rising. Violet begins to suspect that leadership is hiding a very terrible secret. Friends, enemies, lovers, everyone at this war college has an agenda, because once you enter, there are only two ways out: graduate or die. New York Times bestselling author Jennifer Armentrout says, Fourth Wing will have your heart pounding from beginning to end, a fantasy like you have never read before.
Ferryman by Justin Cronin. Cronin is best known for his vampire series, The Passage, but you'll find no vampires in this book. You will find science fiction, fantasy, thriller, dystopian, and some other genres I can't mention without giving away too much of the plot. Meet Proctor. He's a ferryman. He takes people on the island of Prospera to go to the nursery to be reborn once their bodies and minds start to give out. But what happens when his own father refuses to board the ferry? And what's going on with the people who are in the serving class of Prospera who are starting to revolt? And what if everything I just told you about this book, well, maybe it was a dream, maybe it was a hallucination, maybe it's a fantasy? If you want your mind blown by a spectacular book and don't mind the rug getting pulled out from under you, give The Ferryman a try.
The Puzzle Master is the latest from New York Times bestselling author Danielle Trussoni. This suspenseful thriller was released on June 13th and is the first in another duology. The Puzzle Box is the follow-up book with a yet-to-be-determined publish date. Reality and the supernatural collide when an expert puzzle maker is thrust into an ancient mystery, one with explosive consequences for the fate of humanity. Mike Brink was a football star when he suffered a traumatic brain injury that caused a rare medical condition, acquired savant syndrome. Fewer than 50 documented cases of this syndrome are known in the world. With acquired savant syndrome, Brink developed a mental superpower to solve puzzles, any puzzle, and yet he cannot connect with people and he becomes isolated. He's then asked to meet with Jess Price, a woman who is serving 30 years for murder. She hasn't spoken for 5 years since she was arrested. Price drew up a puzzle, and her therapist thinks that if Brink can solve this puzzle, it may in fact explain the crime. This book ranges from an upstate New York women's prison to 19th century Prague to the secret rooms of the Pierpont Morgan Library. The Puzzle Master is a tantalizing, addictive thriller in which humankind, technology, and the future of the universe itself are at stake. Angie Kim, author of Miracle Creek, says, in short, The Puzzle Master is the Da Vinci Code, plus The Silent Patient, plus a sprinkle of Stephen King, multiplied by gorgeous writing. From best-selling Australian author Darcy Coates comes the latest horror selection, Dead of Winter, due out July 11th. Library Journal dubbed Coates, quote, a horror master. The setting is a remote cabin in the snowy wilderness. This book will teach you to trust no one. 8 strangers, 1 killer, nowhere left to run. Krista and her boyfriend are headed to the Rocky Mountains for what they hope will be a romantic time away. But their charter bus breaks down, and Krista is rescued, but her boyfriend is gone missing. The weather quickly changes, and it's not safe for them to venture back out to look for him. The group takes shelter in an abandoned hunting cabin, and Krista hopes that they'll be safe once this storm passes. But suddenly the tour guide that she is traveling with goes missing. That same tour guide is later found dead, and those left in the group are now very scared. Krista's trapped with 8 strangers, one of whom is killing for sport. As the storm grows more and more dangerous, the survivors begin to dwindle one by one. Who can Krista trust? And will this mountain in the freezing cold become her tomb? This is a graphically grim, locked room mystery that Kirkus Reviews has dubbed a fast-paced thriller aimed at readers who enjoy a hunt.
Now we'll focus on some contemporary stories. The Saturday Night Supper Club by J. Ryan Straddle, author of The Kitchens of the Great Midwest. This is both a contemporary story and historical fiction. It follows 3 generations of a family who have run the supper club, the Lakeside Supper Club in Minnesota, for many years. Some members of the family want to sell the restaurant, and others really want to keep it as the restaurant struggles through changing times. And now there's new competition. A new restaurant is opening in town, owned by a major corporation, and one that makes the family who owns it quite wealthy. We meet all the characters from the Lakeside Supper Club and the wealthy family owning the chain restaurant. If you're a Midwesterner, you'll love this, and the rest of us can just enjoy a virtual visit to northern Minnesota. Pour yourself a brandy old-fashioned, make yourself a relish tray, and enjoy these fun, quirky characters.
Yellowface by R.F. Kuang. By the brilliant Rachel Kuang, a PhD student at Yale University and the author of Babel, an epic historical fantasy. In Yellowface, Kuang takes on the publishing industry, cultural appropriation, and who is allowed to write about diverse subjects. In it, a white author steals an unpublished manuscript written by her friend, a more successful Asian American novelist who died in a freak accident, and she publishes it as her own. So what if June Hayward edits Athena's novel and sends it to her agent as her own work? So what if she lets her new publisher rebrand her as Juniper Song, complete with an ambiguously ethnic author photo? Doesn't this piece of history deserve to be told, whoever the teller? The book is a huge success until rumors crop up about its authorship. At times funny, chilling, and very uncomfortable, I couldn't stop reading to find out what happens to June Song Hayward.
Tom Lake is the latest from New York Times best-selling author Ann Patchett and is due for an August 1st release, perfect for fans of Patchett's earlier works, The Dutch House and Commonwealth. It's the spring of 2020, and Laura's 3 daughters have returned home to the family's orchard in northern Michigan. It's the start of the pandemic. The orchard workers can no longer complete the picking, and as a result, the family must take over and begin to work together. All the while they're picking in the orchard, the daughters begin to pester their mom to tell them stories. Specifically, stories about Peter Duke, a famous actor with whom their mom shared a stage and a romance with years before at a theater company called Tom Lake. As Laura shares her past, the daughters examine their own lives and relationship with their mother and are forced to reconsider the world and everything they thought they knew. The publisher says about this book, Tom Lake is a meditation on youthful love, married love, and the lives parents have led before their children were born. Both hopeful and elegiac, it explores what it means to be happy, even when the world is falling apart. As in all of her novels, Ann Patchett combines compelling narrative artistry with piercing insights into the family dynamic. The result is a rich, luminous story told with profound elegance and emotional subtlety. This demonstrates once again why Patchett is one of the most revered and acclaimed literary talents working today.
We can't leave out the ever-popular mysteries and thrillers.
The Secret Book of Flora Lee by Patty Callahan Henry. In war-torn London of 1939, 14-year-old Hazel and 5-year-old Flora are evacuated to a rural village for their safety. Living along the Thames, Hazel fills their days with walks and games to distract her much younger sister, including a story that she creates for her sister and her sister alone, a fairy tale about a magical land, a secret place they can escape to that is all their own. And then, tragically, one day, Flora disappears. 20 years later, Hazel is in London, working at a rare bookstore and living in a Bloomsbury flat. But her tidy life is turned upside down when she unwraps a package at the bookstore, which contains an illustrated book called Whisperwood and the River of Stars. It's the story she had created for her sister. But Hazel never told anyone else about this imaginary world. Who could have created this book? Could her sister still be alive? This is a very lovely book about the bond between sisters, the magic of storytelling. It's made for book lovers.
Warrior Girl Unearthed is by Angeline Boulleys. Many of you might have read her previous novel, Firekeeper's Daughter. They're both young adult novels, but they're perfect for adults as well. This is a follow-up to Firekeeper's Daughter, but it is a standalone story, so you don't have to have read that first. Perry Firekeeper lives on an Ojibwe reservation, and she plans on spending her summer slacking off and mainly going fishing every day. But her parents sign her up to do an internship at her Ojibwe tribe's local museum. While there, she learns that a local college still has the bones and relics of the legendary warrior girl. Perry and her friends scheme and think of ways to get the school to give those relics back to their tribe. Perry and us as readers learn more about the NAGPRA law, the Native Americans Graves Protection and Repatriation Act. But these are teenagers, so they're also going to come up with some unusual ways to think about convincing the college to give those things back.
The Whispers is a women's literary fiction selection released on June 6th from Ashley Audrain, who you may remember as the author of The Push, a 2021 Good Morning America book club pick. The book unfolds over the course of several days in a suburban neighborhood, and the story is told from multiple points of view, specifically 4 women whose lives are connected not only by their home's proximity, but by the choices that intersect their families. Xavier Loverly falls from his bedroom window and is now in a coma. How did he fall? Will he survive? And what led up to this moment? We slowly learn the answers through our 4 main characters. Whitney Loverly is Xavier's mom, a woman who will not leave his bedside, yet admits she struggles to live day to day as a mother. Then there's Rebecca. She's the ER doctor who is treating Xavier, and she's struggling to have a baby of her own. And Blair, Whitney's best friend and neighbor across the street, who happens to be the mother of Xavier's schoolmate and one-time best friend Chloe. And finally Mara, the older woman who sits on her front porch and in her rocking chair as she observes the family interactions as they unfold. Over the course of the next several days, the events leading up to Xavier's fall are revealed, along with many secrets, lies, scandals, and more. Mary Kubica, New York Times bestselling author, says, quote, driven by desire, jealousy, and revenge, everyone is under suspicion and guilty of something in this powerful, edgy, and addictive novel by the queen of psychological drama, Ashley Audrain. An honest, uncensored look at women and motherhood in the wake of a mysterious tragedy, The Whispers, is a must-read, end quote. The couple strip was released on June 6th and is the debut for author Ulf Kvensler. This is a thriller out of Sweden and is dubbed a mystery, suspense, crime fiction. This is perfect for fans of Ruth Ware and Lucy Foley. The couple's trip features 3 friends, Anna, Henrik, and Milena, who hike together every year in the rugged mountains of Sarek National Park. This year, Milena asks if her boyfriend, Jacob, can join the group, and the friends agree. Soon, those same friends will determine that that decision might be one they would soon regret. This is a twists and turns book that will grip you early and keep you reading. The book follows the hikers, and you can follow their path through a map that is featured and made available at the front of the book. The author himself makes a note under the timeline of the map. He says, in general, I would dissuade you from going to Sarek if you do not have great prior experience with mountain hiking. My friends and I have hiked every year for the past 20 years. An independent online newspaper, Bach 365, says this thriller grabs you immediately and keeps you in its grips. You are invested in the characters, and Venzler throws enough ingredients into the pot along the way so you never lose interest. The couple's trip won the Swedish Academy of Crime Writers Award Best Debut of the Year.
Thank you for listening, and we hope you found some great reading suggestions.